Hi, my name is Siobhan and I'm from Barbados. Now, for the past 2 years, I have been experiencing the effects of community policing overreach, which is the misuse or excessive application of community policing strategies in ways that undermine civil liberties, violate due process, or result in informal or unregulated forms of social control. Now, for me, this has been in the form of the misuse of informant networks and the mobilization of everyday people um, used as an informal extension of law enforcement, even in a situation that might be based on perhaps an informal police investigation, and for sure where no formal charges have been brought. Now, despite informing the community to be on watch against me as if I'm some kind of criminal, police are not acknowledging the existence of any investigation, which puts me in a kind of limbo, whereas I am unable to seek a resolution or legal recourse for the actions taken against me, which includes civil harassment, stalking, defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, intentional interference with my ability to earn an income. Now, I am of the belief that most of the people who participate is just your everyday person who trusts in the guidance of law enforcement as well as other persons in positions of authority. And I say this even though I have noted that there are a subset of people that seem to know what they are doing. And this gives me the impression that there's a sinister side to this campaign being rallied against me by law enforcement. Now, under normal circumstances, I would not be keen to share my personal life with the world, but I am convinced that our justice system has been compromised to the extent whereas a resolution cannot be gained from using that avenue. So I've made a series of videos sharing my experiences over the past 2 years so people can get an understanding of what things have been like on my end of the spectrum. Now, I am hoping that my message sheds light on a situation that I believe is also affecting other people as well and might be too difficult for them to discuss. So, with that being said, thank you for your time. And without further ado, here is part one of my story. This is the first in a series of 4 videos where I share my story of being systematically harassed by the Government of Barbados through community policing overreach and the abuse of informant networks. In this video, I'll be going over my mobbing experience, which started back in 2023, featuring the sensitization process. For those who are unfamiliar with the term, the sensitization process refers to the gradual development of heightened awareness, reactivity, or sensitivity to a stimulus, situation, or environment.
Let's start from the beginning. Let's start from the beginning, right?
So, I had stayed at my mother's home for about 6 months in 2019 before deciding to move out. Despite my best efforts to remain civil, she started picking at the smallest things at the time and would bicker for no reason. Like one time, I had cleaned the house, and now I am not saying that to get thanks or recognition or anything. It's just part of the story, right? So anyway, she came home and went straight into the kitchen and started quarreling about how she would never clean her fridge with a steel woolly.
What the hell is even that?
Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the term steel wool, It is a scoring pad used to scrub off grime and dirt, and it's pretty heavy duty compared to the normal dish sponge. And at the time, I was like,
That is not correct.
what is she even talking about? Because she's looking at the exterior of the fridge. It was a stainless steel exterior fridge, right? She's looking at the exterior of the fridge, which is clean, and saying she sees scratches and believes I made them with a steel woolly, right? So that accusation really triggered me because not only did I use a wet cloth to remove the dirt and grime on the outside of the fridge, but the fridge also was more than 10 years old, and underneath that dirt and grime were scratches. It's true. And when I saw them, I could only assume that they were from years past, like wear and tear from years past. Anyway, that was when I decided, all right, listen, I really tired of this foolish bickering. And I decided, despite my financial challenges, despite me having issues with my financial bandwidth, I still decided to move out. I had chosen a small studio apartment that was located in Derrick's St. James. Now, in Derek's, I had a few experiences that were strange, but not really strange enough to take action on. My neighbors were a mother and son who lived in the apartment next to mine, and the son, who was a grown man, probably late 30s, was always hovering around the yard, like constantly, morning, noon, night, even twilight hours, right? And he would do these little strange things in the yard just all day, all night, over and over and over. So it felt off, but it wasn't really enough for me to make a big deal of it. So, it went like that for a while until, eventually I came home to find the yard facing window of my apartment bent out of shape in a way that suggests that it was pried open while I was at work. And what was even stranger still was nothing was taken. Absolutely nothing. Window pried out of shape, like it was forced open, no longer able to close because it pried out of shape and bent out of shape. Nothing taken in the apartment. But still, I decided to move from that location, and that was when I chose to move to Bagatelle. Now, things were fine in Bagatelle Terrace for a little over a year, but then I started to notice strange occurrences. Like some days I would come home from work and find the things in my apartment moved around, not in a way that was immediately obvious, right? Like, for example, my gas stove had those little lid pieces that cover the burners, and sometimes I would come home and find all of them removed and just sitting on the counter stacked on top of one another. Or like I would come home and find all the lights turned on in every single room of the apartment. One time I came home and found one of my backup boxes of toothpaste, one that I had stored away for when I eventually needed it. It was opened and placed by the sink next to my toothbrush.
Hold up. Wait a minute. Something ain't right.
And this wasn't happening every day, but it was happening often enough, sometimes once a week, sometimes multiple times a week. And not too long after that is when I started to experience electrical problems, where the electricity would fluctuate high and low, on and off, all day and all night, to a point where it was impossible for me to use any electrical appliances or leave any gadgets plugged in, like my phone or laptop, because they would get damaged. So around that time, I was also having problems with my rent, whereas I would pay a few days late sometimes.
I'm broke, nigga. I'm broke.
And I thought that, no, maybe all these strange occurrences were the hand of the landlord, like hinting that she was fed up, right? And she also lived on the same property, which I think for a lot of people is a big no-no when they're choosing a place to rent. But I did it anyway, against my best judgment. But either way, I summed it up to, the fact that, well, I would clearly need to leave because, I didn't expect that this landlord would be so petty. I wouldn't imagine a person would do these things rather than come directly out and say that they had a grievance. But it was clear to me that on top of that, I was living above my means, and so I bit the bullet and I asked my mother to move back home again by the end of January 2023 due to an issue with the wiring for the bedroom that me and my daughter were staying in. There wasn't any light, much to my daughter's dismay, but we had to make do with that. And by the end of March, that same year, 2023, my daughter's father moved to Scotland with his wife. And right around that time, I was trying my best to contribute to my daughter going to school, as her father would normally have been the one to take her to school, pick her up. He was also very active with planning clubs and a whole range of other things that he used to oversee to make sure that she had the full supported childhood experience. And at first, after he left, his parents offered to help with transportation. And they were fine with dropping her off and picking her up every day. But in the weeks leading up to him leaving, I had already made it my mind that I had wanted to alternate weeks because I felt like it would be fair if I at least made the effort to take her up to school, every other week. Despite her grandparents still bearing the responsibility of picking her up from school every single day, as I don't drive, and at the time work for me finished at 4:30 p.m., right? And I was always late, so oftentimes I had to stay after 4:30. So of course everything I'm describing now is before the mobbing started.
So it begins.
Now my mobbing began within 2 weeks of my daughter's dad leaving the island. It first started at my workplace, more specifically along the stairwell. I would be heading to lunch or coming back from lunch, and random people would be waiting in the stairway. They'd hold up their phones, snap a picture with a very loud shutter sound, and then walk off. Quick, 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 quick. Now, when I say very loud, and this is in terms of the shutter sound, I mean it was louder than any phone camera I had ever heard. Almost like it wasn't a real shutter sound, but an audio recording being played, like it was the sound of a camera going off, like it was just that loud. And this strange phenomenon happened over and over again for the course of about a week. Then it started happening in other places, like when I would go out to lunch, for example, I would notice random strangers, usually young men who looked questionable, no offense. They would be standing uncomfortably close to me, elbow to elbow, like we arrived together, and then they'd hold up their phones, take a picture, and again, shutter sound, sounding real loud, and then walk off, just like that was the mission. And sometimes I wouldn't even notice how close these people would get in my personal space until the shutter sound went off. And little did I know that was a sensitization process, right? I didn't know anything about any of this at the time. At the time, I'm like, what is even this about? I mean, it ain't threatening, but it's deeply disconcerting. And it didn't take long before I started keeping an eye out for these snap and flee people. And then that is when I started to realize something else. Dozens of people at a time on the street, at work, even in stores, would hold up their phones in a very specific way, deliberate, consistent. But what was most intense for me was my first experience with that same situation in the bus terminal. When I left work, police vehicles would be cruising by, or on foot police officers would walk ahead of me or behind me on my way to the Constitution River bus terminal. And also, again, young men looking unemployed or just loitering. Again, no offense, right? They would tailgate me or walk directly beside me. Sometimes one on one side, one on the next side.
What the fuck?
And I tested this theory by walking past the bus terminal and just keep walking and walking and walking, and a young man followed me the whole way, the entire way. Now, most evenings in the bus terminal, there would normally be a mass of people waiting to catch different buses. That part was not unusual, but at this point, for me, Around 70 to 80% of them were participating in this unexplainable phenomenon, holding and angling their phones in the same ways, using gestures that were too uniform, too symbolic to be a coincidence. And regardless of what time I left work, the same van would almost always be waiting there conveniently. And almost everyone who would get onto the van or even would be on the van already did the same gestures, these same symbolic gestures, with the cell phone being this common theme. And I knew that what I was experiencing was quite real. So the issue wasn't me questioning my sanity or anything like that. But for me, what was the most jarring, was that this coordinated mobbing tactic was so widespread, so well executed, that I found it hard to believe that I had never heard or seen anything like it.
And I started thinking to myself, man, what did he do to make them niggas that mad?
And no matter who I asked or went to for clarification, everyone was acting clueless and concerned for me. Like me asking about it is a signal that there's issues with my mental. And a few of them had a smirk, even though they were also dismissing and gaslighting me. And I was flabbergasted because I could not figure out how so many people could be complicit yet remain gagged in a way that created a type of information asymmetry where a whole mass of people seemed to know something that I did not. Even after this, I was not prepared for what was to come at the Reggae on the Hill event. Now, part of my job involved the opportunity to sometimes work at special events, and at those events our task was simply to monitor the event, for lack of a better description, and make notes for the purpose of reconciling certain information. Now, at this particular event, I was stationed at the entrance next to the ticket booth. And although I'm calling it a ticket booth, it wasn't actually a booth. They were sitting and standing at different tables. So at the entrance to this event, there were many police officers, police dogs, security personnel, etc. And many of the police officers who were around me were doing the same gestures with their phones, and some of them were smirking real smirky, the smirkiest of smirks, as if there was an inside joke that I was not privy to.
That's funny to me.
Seeing so many law enforcement officers involved at one time in some grand display of intimidation, that was when I finally started to realize that what I was experiencing wasn't based on some wayward group that was into questionable harassment tactics. The heavy involvement of law enforcement meant that it was a legitimate program that I was witnessing, a program that had, for some reason, I hadn't heard about it or even had the capacity to conceive it. I became even more concerned because my own perception of law enforcement was that they were there to protect and serve.
Wrong.
But then, why was law enforcement participating in this? Was there something I had been accused of that nobody told me about? I started thinking deeply about any possible thing that could have been the cause, from a strange bruise on my daughter's eyelid back in June 2021 to anything strange that might have happened at work that I could have overlooked.
A few moments later.
Working the entire event took me close to 8 hours, and honestly, I was not planning on waiting until the end because the ticket area closed up about an hour before the final performance. And I call my ride and tell myself, nah, my job done here. I'm really going through this here longer than I need to. But ironically enough, I still ended up waiting for the full hour anyway due to issues with traffic. And near the very end of the event, masses of people began to leave all at once. And I was still seated at the entrance where I was originally. And nearly 80% of these people that were leaving the event made these gestures. It was a grand gesture as they were walking out. And many of them had the look on their face, a smug look of knowing on their faces. And At the time, I was stunned, I was concerned, I was curious, I was disillusioned, I was all kind of things, a whole list, because it really dawned on me that I had been living my whole life in a bubble, and that there was an aspect of society that I had never perceived or could even conceive. That's how I'm feeling, perplexed. As a constant state since this year started happening to me. And, for me, when I saw that, I'm like, oh, I need to find an explanation for what I'm witnessing. Because again, it was so widespread, so pervasive, that it would be impossible not to find the truth behind what was going on. And lucky for me, after completed my bachelor's degree in 2020 and my master's degree in 2022, I had become exceptionally good at research, and I was determined to put these skills to use. Surveillance state.
We've heard the saying, see something, say something, but a new app is taking it to another level. It's called See Something, Send Something. SNN's Nadine Young has a closer look.
A game changer for crime fighting. Former deputy and law enforcement consultant Kevin Angel created the app, See Something, Send Something.
It sets up geofences, kind of like a retail coffee shop would, to notify you that they're close by, but it uses them for law enforcement, for suspicious situations, or anywhere where they're trying to gather information.
Connecting citizens to law enforcement in real time. The app shows active scenes or the last known location of a missing child.
There is a 2-mile radius set up around 22nd Street. When we click on that, we get a missing child alert. And when we hit those details, we get all the information.
Sending alerts directly to your phone, the free app allows citizens to send pictures, video, and audio clips while remaining anonymous.
Instead of sending it to social media, immediately get it to law enforcement, increase that communication back and forth, solve those crimes faster. We can send in a tip, or we can immediately hit police, which will allow us to call 911.
Combining information in a central location, 18 agencies across Florida are using the See Something, Send Something app.
And over the last couple of years, there's been kind of a breakdown between the everyday citizen and law enforcement. And the hope behind it is to increase that communication, as well as move the communication into a more millennial usage, where we can send that information fast, like we would on Facebook or Twitter.